Reading shifts. As time passes, what we enjoy in our reading changes. There's a reading shifts tag going around. This was started by the wonderful Hannah of Hannah's Books, and I was tagged by Kelly of Books I'm Not Reading. I'm not doing the tag, but I'm looking at how my reading has changed from the 1990s to today, by looking at some of the books I read in 1990, a few in 1992, and what I'm reading today and how these are different. My name is Jim. This is my channel, Books, Reading and Stuff. Notebook. It's falling apart a bit now. I used to record all the gigs I went to in the 1980s. I was far more into gigs than into reading. I saw so many bands, like Primal Scream I saw 14 times, Underneath What I saw 17 times, and I saw a lot of bands. There's Marillion, I saw Pink Floyd, I saw Steve Earle, New Model Army, and lots of smaller bands. There's Pink Floyd, I saw Pink Floyd at the Sydney Entertainment Centre, $38.10. Now, I rarely see any bands. The last big band I saw was Deep Purple in 2013 here in Tbilisi. But we're not here to see my bands, the bands I saw, but the books I read. This goes back to 1990. Here we see Dick Francis. I read a lot of Dick Francis at the time. My first wife was really into horses, and she had probably all the Dick Francis novels, so I gradually went through them. Marion Bradley is not a writer I'd read anymore because of what she did. I enjoyed Mists of Avalon. I wasn't so keen on Web of Darkness. When I was writing down the books I'd read, I didn't put a star rating for them at the time. This was pre-Goodreads, 1990, 35 years ago. Michael Moorcock, I haven't read him for a long time. I'd like to read some more. You can also see I also went through a Franz Kafka phase, reading all of Kafka's novels and a lot of his short stories, and even a biography about Kafka by Ernst Pavel. A couple of South American writers, Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Tom Sharp, Stephen Crane. I read Stephen Crane in university. Not the Red Badge of Courage, but some of his shorter stories like The Blue Hotel. He's one of my favourite American writers. More Dick Francis, there's The Trial by Kafka. Alan Sillitoe, I'd read a lot of Alan Sillitoe at the time, and also Neville Shute. Not many female writers. There's Tama Janowitz. There's Betty Mahmoudi, Not Without My Daughter. Marion Bradley, who I mentioned, Isabel Allende, but this is not a lot. In 1990, only 5 books I read were by women authors, 2 by Tama Janowitz, and the others by the others I mentioned, Marion Bradley, Betty Mahmoudi, and Isabel Allende. Graham Masterton is a writer I still read. Too is interesting because I moved to France, and Voyage au centre de la Terre, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, science fiction. I read this in French. This is the first book I read in French, and then I read some more, like Le Père Goriot by Balzac. I'm surprised to see it's only 254 pages here. It seemed like a lot more at the time. Camus, L'Étrangère. This is still one of my favourite books of all time. I'll be reading books in English as well. Sébastien Jaspiro, another French one. And I went through a George Orwell phase. And Agatha Christie. I read a lot of Agatha Christie. Here reading in English, but I later read Agatha Christie in France. I lived in France for 6 years. And again, see Alan Sillitoe, Robert Silverberg, David Morrell. A variety of authors. Now this is 2025. Now these books have a star rating, and there's a few other little bits and pieces I mark down the country the author's from, if it's not from UK or US, like Australia, Russia, Canada. Not many from other places, none of the South American writers I was reading in 1990. And there's a greater variety of authors now. In 2025, I only read 4 authors more than once. They were Charles Dickens, of course. I finished reading all of Charles Dickens' novels. Irina Shapiro, who writes Victorian murder mysteries. I read a few of hers. And then later we have Becky Chambers, science fiction. I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I read a later book by her somewhere. Inga Wolf as well. I read a few of hers. She's Danish, DK, Danish, and The Perfect Place to Die. It's a brilliant book. I wasn't so taken with Under a Black Sky. It's still a 4-star read, but Perfect Place to Die might be one of my favourite books of the year. There's a lot more variety, as I said, of different authors. And the male-female ratio is a lot different now. 38 of the 69 books I've read this year have been by female authors, 31 by male, although I'm not sure if any of the authors I read identify as non-binary, and sometimes with the initials it's difficult to tell. So my reading has changed quite a bit. I'm not reading Dick Francis at the moment. I haven't read Dick Francis for a while. I do still read some of the authors I was reading back in the 1990s, like Graham Masterton. I read this one this year, Living Death. I prefer now his police procedurals to his horror books that he used to write. Franz Kafka is still one of my favourite writers, and I've recently reread The Trial, I've reread Metamorphosis. I don't read in French. I haven't read in French for about 10 years. Maupassant I've put on a couple of TBRs, but I haven't got around to reading him. I still have L'Étranger in French. And I'm currently reading this, The Dinosaur Hunters by Deborah Cadbury, non-fiction, because this is November. If you enjoyed this video, it was rather self-indulgent, I do confess. You can give it a thumbs up. This will help with the YouTube algorithm. You can let me know what you've been reading, how your reading tastes have changed over the years. I'd be interested to know. And I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.